if their child is doing it correctly. So hopefully from this video, you'll get some clarification or some understanding that your child is doing it right, or maybe what they can do to make it even better. So since we're talking about the plan, that means that they have already cubbed their prompt, and that's when they circle what type of essay this will be, which is informational. They've underlined what they're really being asked to talk about, and they've boxed in some topic words like problems, national parks, more people visiting. And I also asked them to, if there's a word that is repeated, we probably need to box it because that means it's very important. So the article and the prompt I've chosen is the one about the national parks, which is something that the students are familiar with and something you may have seen them doing at home as well. So after they cub, circle, underline, and box, they need to create the question that they're going to answer. And I've started off with the question word of what, because the students normally get a prompt that either starts with why or how, and it's normally stated inside their prompt. When there are no question words in the prompt, they need to start with the word what. And so here in our prompt here, write an informational essay about the problems national parks are facing as more people visit and new problems arise. There's no question in there, no question word. So we're going to start off with what. And then they can use some of those boxed in words. What new problems are national parks facing as more people visit? And so it really takes exactly what the prompt is asking them, but putting it into a question so they can think of it like, I need to answer this question. How can I answer this question? And we've talked about how you can get a very general thesis from the question by taking those same boxed in words and putting them into a very general way, such as there are many or several. And here in particular, I came up with two theses that they could have, which are there are many new problems national parks are facing as more people visit. And then I've also done a different one where they could put that general statement in the middle. National parks are facing several new problems as more people visit. So it kind of gives them two different ways to state their thesis, and they don't even have to read the article to get their thesis. They don't have to already find their evidence. They're going straight from that question right into what they're going to be answering. There are many new problems, and they're going to be looking for those new problems. So after they have their thesis, they should be looking for evidence from their sources, and for this purpose I just picked a few pieces of evidence that we could use from the source. And they know that they need to be choosing evidence from different sources. So if they have a point 1 and a point 2, it can't all be from source 1. It needs to try to be spread throughout their sources. Since they are given up to 4, they need to know or show the reader that they're using all 3 or 4 or how many they get. They're using them all to answer this prompt. So in particular, I used the evidence from source 1. Instead, they think of nature as their sketch pad. They draw on rocks and trees in national parks, then post photos of their work on the internet. And I keep telling them, you need to think about that question. So if my question is, what new problems are national parks facing? Well, I have my first one here. They're drawing on rocks and trees. They're using it like a sketch pad. That is one problem I can pull out. And all of this is called graffiti, which a lot of them can kind of connect those two things. The next one, I want to go to a different source, so I've chosen source 3. And this one was a chart, so it's different than text, but they can get charts and captions and photographs. So I chose, I'm still thinking about that, what are some problems that the national parks have? And I found this one here is that campers and hikers leave litter in national parks by the hundreds of pounds each year. Well, that's a problem, so I can highlight that as evidence. And then to go with it, I've kind of highlighted here, plastic beverage bottles take 450 years to decompose. That is also a problem I can think about when I'm talking about litter. And I told them from this chart, they need to try to choose things that are really going to drive their point home. And that's a big deal. So on this chart, you have things like nylon fabric is 30 to 40 years. But that's not really going to prove my point or drive it home that littering is bad. A lot of people probably aren't going to take nylon fabric on a camping or hiking trip, but they're certainly going to take a plastic bottle because they might be bringing bottled water or bottled soda, and it takes a very long time for that to decompose. So these two pieces of evidence have helped me answer the question, what are the problems? So I have two different problems here. After they've gone through and they've found their evidence, they've underlined their evidence, and they're ready to do their plan, they know they need to fold it, and they have all these letters they're writing down the side. And so what they start with is, after they fold it and write those letters, they're starting with their introduction, which is the S and the T. Now we already have the T, which is the thesis, because we wrote it right after the question. So that can be something written down right away. And I know it's the same one because there are several new problems. I have that very general statement there. The S actually stands for summary. And the students need to think about the articles and the sources that they were given and create a 1 to 2 sentence about what the whole thing was about, or how these articles are connected. And so they always start with "in the articles." And something that we found out at a meeting was that they need to make sure that they're referencing the title of the articles. And so that's something a little bit new for them to get in. But here, since there are 3 titles, it makes it a little bit longer for their summary, but they do need to mention those titles. So my first title was "No Graffiti in National Parks." My second source was actually a photograph, and it was titled "Sign Posted in National Park." And my last one was the chart, and it was titled "How Long Before It's Gone." Okay, so now that I have my sources mentioned, I can kind of phrase it in one sentence what all 3 of those things were about. The author discusses the problems that people are causing for national parks. Okay, and so now I have my summary. One sentence, what were both of those or all 3 of those articles about in one sentence. Okay, and I've made sure I've said the titles of the sources, and I've got that very basic summary of what they were all about. So in the articles, no graffiti in national parks, sign posted in national park, and how long before it's gone. The author discusses the problems that people are causing for national parks. There are several new problems that national parks are facing as more people visit. So these 2 sentences will be in my introduction. Okay, so they now have their introduction complete. Now, since I've already found evidence in my article, I need to think about what points or what are my answers to the question. So you think of your point like your answer. So if my question is, what are the problems? I know I have graffiti is one problem and litter is another problem. So I need to make sure I write that on my plan. And these need to be written in a sentence, and they do have transitional phrases to start them. So one they can use is to start with one problem national parks are facing is graffiti. Okay, so I'm kind of taking part of that thesis, talking about problems and national parks, and I'm giving my answer. One of those problems is graffiti. Okay, my other point that I found was about litter. So I need to mention that. And this also has a transitional phrase. Additionally, national parks are dealing with litter from campers. So I have that they have an issue, and their issue is that they're dealing with litter, or that they are, what another problem is, they're dealing with litter. You can say it in several different ways to kind of get your answer in. So I now have my 2 answers. What are the problems? One is graffiti, and the other is litter. Okay, so now I'm going to go on and complete my body paragraphs, which is my PILA. So here's the second part of my plan. So I've got my point, and now I need to look for my E, which is my evidence. And E does not need to be in a complete sentence as they write it on their plan. When they go into their writing essay, it does need to be put into a sentence that starts with according to the text or according to the article. If it's a chart, they can say according to the chart. But on their plan, they just need their citation, which is telling them where it comes from. So when I think about graffiti, I go back to my articles. I know this is the evidence I want to use for graffiti, and I find out that it is on paragraph 2. So when I go to my plan, I just write my citation as PAR, which stands for paragraph 2. And that's all I need for my evidence on my plan. I can also go to this one since I already know that my other point is litter, and I know that I'm taking it from source 3. So since there are no paragraphs, it's a little bit different the way they're going to cite it. They can cite it as a source 3. They can cite it from the chart, or they can cite it from a caption. So they have a few options. The easiest one to choose is to go with the source title. Okay, source number 3. So here, for point number 2 for litter, citation is source 3, since there are no paragraphs. Now that they have their evidence, so they have their point, how they're going to prove their point, they go on to their EL, which is elaboration. And this is where it gets very difficult for the students because they need to really pull the evidence apart and try to prove how that evidence answers their question. And here the question is a problem. So I need to really prove how the people that are drawing on trees and rocks and how they're using it as their sketch pad, how that is a problem for national parks. So the first sentence in their EL can always be a very simple definition for a word that they think is important. So they can start off with define, and then they can think about which word they want to define. So going back to my evidence, instead they think of nature as their sketch pad. They draw on rocks and trees in national parks, then post photos of their work on the internet. The one word that stands out to me that I think I want to explain would be what a sketch pad is, or why they're using it like a sketch pad, because that really shows that they're just painting or drawing anywhere and doing it freehand, and they're just, that's important because it means that there's no restrictions for graffiti artists. So I'm going to come back to my elaboration. I'm going to define the word sketch pad. And here, you'll notice I am not actually putting the definition into a sentence. I want them to use their plan as a plan, an outline to guide them, not that they're rewriting everything. So elaboration, I just wrote myself a note that my first sentence is going to define the word sketch pad. The second sentence can start off 2 ways. They can start off by saying if, then. So if this happens, then this will happen. Or they can start off with this is important because, and it really depends on their type of evidence. So here I'm talking about graffiti, that they're doing it on trees and rocks. So I'm going to use an if then. And the thought I'm connecting here is if people are using graffiti in national parks, then that means they're putting chemicals in the air when they spray their can of paint, or when they're painting on the tree, the tree is absorbing chemicals. So to give myself a note, not a full sentence, I'm going to say if they graffiti, then they put chemicals into the air. So when I go to actually write this, I'm probably going to say if people in the park are using graffiti, then that means they are spraying chemicals into the air. So I'm kind of expanding what I'm putting on my plan. But on my plan, I need to write some notes to myself. So number 2, I'm going to talk about how that puts chemicals into the air. Now number 3, sentence number 3 always seems to be very difficult for students because they sometimes repeat what they put down in number 2. And this is where we need to help them say, okay, think about number 2. So here in particular, we're talking about putting chemicals into the air. I need to prove the point that that's bad. What could happen or what might happen to the national park or things in the national park. So they can start off with a prediction sentence, which would be perhaps, maybe, or they can start off by saying common sense would say, that people wouldn't want that to happen. So here I'm going to start with the word maybe. That's the word I'm going to choose. And I'm going to talk about how maybe plants and animals will die because air isn't clean. If there's chemicals in the air and plants and animals need those to survive, they need oxygen, they might die, they might get hurt, they might get sick because that air isn't clean. So I can go from sentence 3 on my notes of plan, and I can then put it into a sentence and expand it a little bit. So for my elaboration, I'm talking about the sketch pad, how they're using nature as a sketch pad, how if they're graffitiing, then that means they're spraying chemicals into the air. And then 3, if they're spraying chemicals into the air, why is that a problem? What could that do in the future? And so that kind of wraps up their elaboration. The very last thing is the A, which is the argument. I tell them this really wraps up your entire Peel paragraph, and it connects back to your point. So if my point was about the problem national parks are facing is graffiti, my A starts off with another transitional phrase. All of this proves that graffiti is a big problem for national parks. Okay, so again, I'm still using part of my point. It's almost like I'm rephrasing my point, but I need to just wrap it up. And tell me, you're kind of wrapping it up in a little box, like a little present with a bow on top. You're concluding that paragraph because you're going to move on to a new paragraph, which is your PILA number 2. So now my PILA 1 is done, and I do the exact same thing for PILA 2. I go through, and my elaboration is going to be to define a word. My sentence number 2 is either going to be an if-then statement or a this is important because. And my 3 is going to be just take it a step further and really prove how that's a problem or why that's going to answer my question. And same thing for your argument. All this proves that. I got to talk about litter being a problem. So I've already completed that one for you so you can see it. So additionally, litter is another problem that national parks are facing. I have source 3, or I can use chart as my citation. I'm going to choose the word to define as litter, and I'm going to change it. Since here I used if then, sentence number 2 on my point, my second PILA, I want to use this is important because. And if I'm talking about litter being a problem, it's important because it can take years to decompose. And then my sentence number 3, I want to take it a step further. Why is it bad if it takes years to decompose? Well, perhaps animals will get sick or hurt due to, that should say, litter. So why is it bad? It's going to be bad because animals and plants could get sick, okay, could get hurt, especially animals could get hurt. And then my argument, I still start off with all this proves that national parks are having to deal with litter left by campers. So I talked about it being a problem because they have to deal with it. And what's the problem? The problem is litter. Okay, so now I have my intro done, my PILA number 1 done, PILA number 2 done, and now I'm going to work towards my conclusion. Most students understand the RT, which is rephrase thesis. And what they have to do is they go back to the thesis they've already written, okay, which is up here, and they rephrase it. Until when you rephrase something, it means you're taking the words and you're changing them, or you're taking the order and you're switching the order around. So that way you're saying the same thing, but in a different way. So here we're going to take a few words to change, such as several, problems, and I actually want to change and try to say something different instead of national parks, since I probably have said it several times in my PILA paragraphs. For my conclusion, I want to make it sound a little bit different. So I'm going to use several, and I'm going to change it to many. Instead of problems, I can say things like concerns or issues. And for national parks, I'm going to come up with that since I know a national park means it's protected and it's an environmental area, I'm going to call it a protected environmental area. So I'm saying it's a national park, but trying to do it in a different way, describing it in a different way. So for my RT, I'm going to say national parks are facing many new areas. Oh, let me change national parks. So protected environmental areas are facing many new issues as more people visit. So I've changed national parks to protected environmental areas. Instead of problems, I'm saying issues. Instead of several, I'm saying many, but I'm saying the exact same thing, just using a different term. So I went from there are several new problems that national parks are facing as more people visit to protected environmental areas are facing many new issues as more people visit. So same thing, just in a different way. BP is another thing that students are struggling with, and we call it a BP because it stands for bucket or point. And we call it bucket because when they're finding evidence, it comes from DBQ. We're having them fill the bucket with evidence. This all proves this one point, this one bucket. And so they can use it interchangeably. Some of them like to put down B at the end. Some of them like to put down P. Either one is the same. Either one is okay because they are the same idea. So here, what they need to do, it's almost like the RT. They're taking their points or their buckets and they're trying to rephrase them or put them together a little bit. So if I'm talking about protected environmental areas are facing many new issues as more people visit, I need to now explain my 2 points. So we can start off with 2 of the biggest issues for the parks are graffiti, so there's my bucket 1, and campers leaving litter at the parks. Okay, so you'll notice I have used both points, graffiti and litter, which come from my points up here, graffiti and litter. Okay, and that's all they have to do. They need to just kind of put those 2 things together and make it connect to their RT. So if people are environmental areas are facing issues, 2 of the biggest issues are blank and blank. And that's all they have to do. And if they wanted to, I told them they can even change the word, the points they're using. So 2 of the biggest issues for the parks are people drawing on nature and campers leaving trash at the parks. So they can say the same thing, just in different terms. So really your conclusion is your RT, rephrasing thesis, and your BP, which is rephrasing your points and putting them together. And that's all they need to do for their conclusion. Those 2 sentences is all they're required for those conclusions. And so when you put it all together, here's their plan all finished. You've got your introduction, so you have your paragraph number 1. Your first PILA will be your paragraph number 2. Your second PILA is your paragraph number 3. And your conclusion is your paragraph number 4. And that's where their essay comes out. They have 4 different paragraphs. It's all connected under one question, which is how our parks, or what are parks facing as problems, and they're answering that question throughout this essay. I hope that has cleared up something for you guys, even if it's just elaboration or the conclusion. The students are getting it. They just need to take it a step further with the elaborations, and they are getting there. Please let me know if there's anything else you kind of need re-clarified from the plan so that I can help you help your children at home. Thank you.